This happened about 2 years ago. I had just moved about an hour and a half away from home, and it was my very first time living away from my childhood home. I was working at a kids' activity camp. All the staff lived in 2 massive cabins in the woods. There were about 40 people in each, 2 or 3 to a room, so you can imagine how big the cabin was. Anyway, everybody became really close, and some people knew each other from previous years working at this particular camp. None of us really locked our doors because we all knew each other, and everybody hung out in different friends' rooms all the time. At this camp, my job was working with the kids during the day and doing evening shifts at the bar, which was there for the staff, parents, and teachers that had come with the children. One night, my roommate and I were both working an evening shift at the bar. She was finishing a couple hours earlier, as she was on a different shift. My roommate, Debbie, decided that she was just going to go back to the room to read and wait for me to finish so we could watch a movie. She had been gone for about 5 minutes, which is how long it takes to get from the bar to the cabin, when my phone started ringing with her caller ID. I picked up the call, since the bar was pretty dead that night and the only people in there were staff. When I picked up the phone call, nobody was saying anything on the other end. I put this down to her just butt dialing me by accident, so I hung up. About a minute later, I got another phone call from a friend that lived across the hallway from us. She told me that I needed to come back to the room right away, so I asked the guy I was working with to cover while I popped back over to the room. I walked down the hallway, and there were about 5 people just standing outside of my room. I walked inside, and Debbie was just standing there crying, which isn't like her at all. Our stuff was all over our room. Please know that this is very weird, because I'm pretty sure I have OCD and often tidied my side and her side of the room, even if she didn't want me to. She went on to tell me that her phone had gone missing. I then asked her about phoning me before I came back to the room, and she had no idea what I was talking about. This meant that someone had taken her phone and knew who to call straight away. Also, when she left work, there would be no point in stealing her phone, as it was literally worthless. It was a $10 phone at the most. A few days later, we started noticing that things had gone missing, but not normal things people would steal. They could have taken laptops, Kindles, a PlayStation, or games, but instead, all they took was my bra and underwear, some clean and some dirty from the clothes basket. This made me feel sick, especially because we knew everyone that we lived and worked with. For a few days, I kept getting these phone calls from Debbie's phone with just silence on the other end. We obviously went and reported it, and our bosses said they would look into it. We kind of got blamed for leaving our doors unlocked, which I understand is being really stupid now. The creepy thing was, a few days later, I walked into the staff lounge, and Debbie's phone was just placed on the windowsill. Nobody was in there, and nobody seemed to be around. Well, at that point, I noped out of there as fast as I could and locked myself in my room until Debbie came back. Nothing ever came of it, and we never found out who it was, but I definitely have a feeling that it was someone who knew us quite well, especially someone who knew when we'd both be out of our room. For the life of me, I still don't know who stole my stuff, my roommate's phone, and who trashed our room, but I have definitely learned a lesson, and that's not to leave my door unlocked. In 2015, when I was 18, I met a guy named Ryan on OkCupid. We talked for a month or 2, and then went on a few dates, and after 2 months, we had our first kiss and everything became official. He had moved to my state from California and told me it was because of a bad breakup with his ex of 3 years. I didn't really dig for more info because it seemed to upset him, and the past was the past. We took things slow because he was a good old-fashioned kind of man, and I loved it. He opened doors for me, genuinely cared about my interests and well-being, and even cooked and brought me lunches sometimes. Fast forward to January 2016. My grandmother was in the hospital. He took off work and stayed by my side the whole time, only leaving to make food runs or runs to my parents' house for things we needed. Sadly, on the 3rd day, my grandmother passed. I stayed at his place, and he had to force me to eat because I was just so depressed. I didn't want life to go on without her. My mother recommended that I moved in with him so I could have the best emotional support. Eventually, after lots of care and therapy, I got better, but I was still very depressed. Then, disaster struck again in March, when I got a phone call from my mother and she asked me to put Ryan on the phone. His face grimaced, and he just said, "Okay, I understand," then handed the phone back to me. My mother then told me that my grandfather, who had moved in with her after my grandmother's passing, had also passed away. She and my family had come home from a baseball game and had found him in the backyard. He couldn't live without my grandmother anymore. Ryan had gotten very close to my grandfather in the few months between my grandmother's passing, and my grandfather would often call him to spend time together because he wasn't used to being alone. The death took a toll on Ryan as well. A few months passed, and everything just felt gray. Then May came up. Ryan took me to where we had our first date, and he proposed. I thought that I'd won the jackpot, and now instead of always feeling down, I had something to look forward to. But here's where things got weird. After he put a ring on me, his attitude changed. He started not liking me hanging out with my friends without him. He became jealous of my male coworkers, insisting that they liked me and constantly tried to get me to quit, just possessive in general. Things only got worse when I had a false positive pregnancy test. We were so excited to be expecting a baby. We already had names picked out, and even decided to put the wedding on hold to put our focus on buying a house for our now growing family. A week or so later, I just felt off. Something told me to take another pregnancy test, which came back negative. I was understandably heartbroken, but when I told Ryan, his reaction was worse. He started crying uncontrollably, but eventually that sadness turned to anger. He started accusing me of losing the baby on purpose because I didn't love him, and then switched gears to, "You must be cheating on me," and lost the baby to hide it. Looking back, I don't know why I stayed, but at the time I just figured it was him just grieving. He continued to accuse me of cheating for months. Even if I took a shower after work, he'd suspect cheating, or even if I smiled at my phone. He even went through my phone while I was asleep and deleted every guy on my phone besides him, my brother, my dad, and my stepdad. Then he started making me send him Snapchats with random objects with timestamps to prove to him I was where I said I was. Eventually, somehow, we got past it and decided to move in with my dad so we could buy a house faster. I picked up a second job for extra money to purely go towards our home, and Ryan decided that since I had 2 jobs, he could just quit his. With his newfound free time, he started buying cars, fixing them up, and then selling them for more money. He would also use this time to stalk my social media and question any guy who liked my post, and eventually started going through our phone bill to see numbers I was texting. He then found the breaking point. He discovered that I sent more texts in a month than he did, which to him was evidence that I was cheating, because in his words, I had no friends. He brought this up to me one night, and I was able to talk him down and explain to him how that's insane, even showing him that I only text him, my mom, my female best friend, and my boss, with the occasional text to my dad or uncle. We went to bed, and the next morning, he went on about it again, so I said, "I'm not having the same fight twice," and walked out of the room. In response to that, he took my car keys and stole my car. He started texting me about how I had never loved him and that I could go ahead and report the car stolen, that he doesn't care anymore, and that he might as well drive off a bridge. I finally convinced him to bring it back, and I got in the car to go to my mom's and broke it off with him. But the story doesn't end there. He then said he only does crazy things like that because he has depression, and I ignore him if he doesn't do something crazy. He promised to get help if I gave him another chance. My dumb self believed that and agreed, but only if he would go to a psychiatrist. He went for about 3 months, got diagnosed with bipolar depression, and was put on a treatment plan. Things started looking better, then all of a sudden, they got bad again. He then told me that he had stopped going because they wanted to take away his guns, and he stopped taking his medicine and flushed it down the toilet. I broke it off with him again because he broke his promise, but then he started stalking me. Anytime I'd get a new male friend on Facebook, he would message them to leave me alone and that I was cheating. He said, "I hope the next guy you date beats and rapes you so you learn to appreciate me." He would show up at my work and hang around my whole shift trying to brag about random Tinder girls he'd match with. He even figured out where my new apartment was and tried to get my roommates to let him in. He started giving out my contact information to creepy dudes, saying I was easy. I eventually cut all contact after he started dating a 19-year-old girl, and he bragged about just using her to pay his bills, as he didn't work. Then he told me he had gotten her pregnant, but would leave her in a heartbeat for me. After I'd cut the contact, I did a little research and found the real reason he left California. He stabbed his ex's brother for trying to defend her after she broke up with him. He also had several domestic abuse charges in 3 other states and had a few warrants out for his arrest. I ended up feeling bad and sent the girl the screenshots of the information I had found, as well as the text he sent me about using her. She didn't believe me and said I was just his crazy jealous ex, then she blocked me. As far as I know, they now have 2 kids, and she is the only one who works. This happened 9 months ago on the third night at our new apartment. My husband, small kids, and I had just moved here to the US from abroad. We were awaiting a huge shipment of all our belongings, so our new 2 bedrooms were totally empty, except for the new mattresses on the floor of the master bedroom, where we all slept while waiting our stuff. So, just for a little context, our apartment was part of a newly built, high-end complex of 3-story condo buildings in a great location. Our second floor, a 2-bedroom unit facing the back, gave visibility to nothing but train tracks, trees, the sound of crickets, and a building site just beyond that. It might not sound like it, but the view is really neat. The freight trains could be very noisy at times, but I actually enjoyed it a lot at first. On this particular night, my husband was snoring horribly. Like the previous night, I couldn't sleep at all because of it, so this time I gathered up some of our bedding, went into the empty second bedroom, and crashed on my little boy's pool mattress. The trains were noisy, but compared to my husband's snoring, it was relaxing and I fell asleep fast. I woke up though, at about 2 a.m. to extremely loud train noises, hissing, grinding, and squeaking, but that wasn't what woke me. It was the heavy vibrations that I felt. I chalked it up to the idling train outside of the bedroom window though, and got up to use the bathroom. On my way back to bed, I crossed the empty living area to check on the kids, and paused in front of the huge window and balcony door for a minute or two, thinking about the noise. I briefly contemplated going out to the balcony since it was such a hot night and my sleep was so bad anyway, but I went back to bed instead. About an hour or so later, I was awoken to more loud noises. These ones felt like they were directly above me. Lots of heavy thumping and thudding that went on for more than an hour. My head was foggy and heavy from a crappy sleep. I wasn't coherent, so I didn't bother trying to reason out the cause for so much noise after hearing the train all night, so I fell back to sleep for a few more hours. My husband woke me in the morning, asking me if I had seen the huge ladder on our balcony. We went out to look, and there it was, a huge metal ladder leaning up against the side of our building. Someone had pulled it up onto our balcony so they could then climb up to the one above us. There were also 2 empty beer bottles sitting on our stroller and a few cigarette butts extinguished on our windowsill, so they'd obviously been taking their little breaks on our balcony. We could see between the balcony floorboards to the door above us, and sure enough, it was completely smashed. The wood frame of the door was in splinters and practically ripped out. We called the police immediately, and they came right away. Apparently, the sole female occupant was away in Florida at the time of the break-in, thankfully. The police didn't give us a lot of information, but they told us that although the entire apartment had been destroyed and ransacked, nothing appeared to be taken. I spoke to the building manager later that day, who told us that every single cushion and bit of bedding had been ripped open, that every single drawer and piece of furniture had been pried open, but that all of our expensive electronics were unscathed, as was a huge glass vase full of money. She returned to her apartment after a week or so, but we never did see her in person. We later heard through another employee of the complex that this tenant had a dangerous ex-husband who couldn't let go, and that it was him who destroyed her place when she realized she wasn't home. I always wonder what would have happened if she had been home. It could have gone down so many different ways. What would the intruder have done if I went out onto the balcony? My precious little kids and husband could have been hurt too. We just didn't feel safe after that incident. The sounds of the trains were just so creepy to hear. We all slept in the same room from that point on, until we switched to a different building a few months later.